in which our protagonists, Anna and Levine, finally meet, and in which one of their tales comes to an end. Chapter 21. After an excellent dinner and a great quantity of cognac drunk at Bartnyansky's, Stepan Arkadyevich, only a little later than the appointed time, entered Countess Lydia Ivanovna's house. "Who else is with the Countess? The Frenchman?" Stepan Arkadyevich asked the hall porter, looking at the familiar overcoat of Alexey Alexandrovich, in a strange, naive overcoat with clasps. "Alexey Alexandrovich Karenina and Count Bezubov," the porter replied sternly. "Princess Miyagi guessed right," thought Stepan Arkadyevich, going up the stairs. "Strange. However, it would be nice to get friendly with her. She has enormous influence. If she'd put in a word for me with Pomorsky, it would be a sure thing." It was still broad daylight outside, but in Countess Lydia's small drawing-room the blinds were already drawn, and the lamps lit. At a round table under a lamp, the Countess and Alexey Alexandrovich sat talking about something in low voices. A short, lean man with womanish hips and knock-kneed legs, very pale, handsome, with beautiful shining eyes and long hair falling over the collar of his frock coat, stood at the other end, studying the portraits on the wall. Having greeted the hostess and Alexey Alexandrovich, Stepan Arkadyevich involuntarily looked again at the unknown man. "Bonjour, Landau." The Countess addressed the man with a softness and carefulness that struck Oblonsky, and she introduced them. Landau hastily turned, approached, and, smiling, placed his inert, sweaty hand into the extended hand of Stepan Arkadyevich, and immediately went back and began looking at the portraits. The Countess and Alexey Alexandrovich exchanged meaningful looks. "I'm very glad to see you, especially today," said Countess Lydia Ivanovna, pointing Stepan Arkadyevich to a place next to Karenina. "I introduced him to you as Landau," she said in a low voice, glancing at the Frenchman, and then at once at Alexey Alexandrovich. "But in fact, he is Count Bezubov, as you probably know, only he doesn't like the title." "Yes, I've heard," Stepan Arkadyevich replied. "They say he cured Countess Bezubov completely." "She called on me today. She's so pitiful." The Countess turned to Alexey Alexandrovich. "This parting is terrible for her, such a blow." "And he's definitely leaving?" asked Alexey Alexandrovich. "Yes, he's leaving for Paris. He heard a voice yesterday," said Countess Lydia Ivanovna, looking at Stepan Arkadyevich. "Ah, a voice," Oblonsky repeated, feeling that he had to be as careful as possible in his company where something special had taken place, or was about to take place, to which he did not yet have the key. A momentary silence followed, after which Countess Lydia Ivanovna, as if approaching the main subject of conversation, said to Oblonsky with a subtle smile, "I've known you for a long time, and am very glad to get to know you more closely. Les amis de nos amis sont nos amis. But to someone's friend, one has to penetrate the friend's state of soul, and I'm afraid you have not done so with regard to Alexey Alexandrovich. You understand what I'm talking about," she said, raising her beautiful, pensive eyes. In part, Countess. I understand that Alexei Alexandrovitch's position, Oblonsky said, not understanding very well what the matter was, and therefore wishing to speak in general. The change is not in his external position, Countess Lydia Ivanovna said sternly, at the same time following Alexei Alexandrovitch with amorous eyes as he got up and went over to Landau. His heart has changed. A new heart has been given him, and I'm afraid you haven't quite perceived the change that has taken place in him. That is, in general terms, I can picture the change to myself. We've always been friends, and now, Stepan Arkadyevich said, responding to the Countess' gaze with a tender gaze of his own, and trying to make out which of the two ministers she was closer to, so as to know which one to ask her about. The change that has taken place in him cannot weaken his feelings of love for his neighbors. On the contrary, the change that has taken place in him can only increase his love, but I'm afraid you don't understand me. Would you like some tea? She said, indicating with her eyes the servant who was offering tea on a tray. Not entirely, Countess. Of course, his misfortune. Yes, a misfortune that turned into the greatest good fortune, when his heart became new, fulfilled in him, she said, gazing amorously at Stepan Arkadyevich. I think I could ask her to put in a word with both of them, thought Stepan Arkadyevich. Oh, of course, Countess, but I think these changes are so intimate that no one, not even the closest person, likes to speak of them. On the contrary, we must speak and help one another. Yes, no doubt, but there are such differences of conviction, and besides, Oblonsky said with a soft smile, there can be no difference in matters of sacred truth. Ah, yes, of course, but, and embarrassed, Stepan Arkadyevich became silent. He realized that they had got on to religion. I think he's about to fall asleep, Alexei Alexandrovitch said in a meaningful whisper, coming up to Lydia Ivanovna. Stepan Arkadyevich turned. Landau was sitting by the window, leaning on the back and armrest of his chair, his head bowed. Noticing the eyes directed at him, he raised his head and smiled a childishly naive smile. Don't pay any attention, said Lydia Ivanovna, and with a light movement she pushed a chair toward Alexei Alexandrovitch. I've noticed, she was beginning to say something when a footman came in with a letter. Lydia Ivanovna quickly scanned the note and, apologizing, wrote an extremely quick reply, handed it over, and returned to the table. I've noticed, she continued the conversation she had begun, that Muscovites, the men especially, are quite indifferent to religion. Oh, no, Countess. I believe the Muscovites have a reputation for being quite staunch, Stepan Arkadyevich replied. But as far as I understand, you, unfortunately, are among the indifferent, Alexei Alexandrovitch said, turning to him with a weary smile. How can one be indifferent? Said Lydia Ivanovna. In that respect, I'm not really indifferent, but expectant, said Stepan Arkadyevich with his most soothing smile. I don't think the time for these questions has come for me. Alexei Alexandrovitch and Lydia Ivanovna exchanged glances. We can never know whether the time has come for us or not, Alexei Alexandrovitch said sternly. We mustn't think whether we're ready or not. Grace is not guided by human considerations. It sometimes descends not upon the laborers, but upon the unprepared, as it did upon Saul. No, not just yet, it seems, said Lydia Ivanovna, who had been following the Frenchman's movements all the while. Landau got up and came over to them. Will you allow me to listen? He said. Oh, yes. I didn't want to disturb you, said Lydia Ivanovna, looking at him tenderly. Sit down with us. One need only not close one's eyes, so as not to be deprived of light, Alexei Alexandrovitch went on. Ah, if you knew the happiness we experience, feeling his constant presence in our souls, said Lydia Ivanovna, smiling beatifically. But sometimes a man may feel himself unable to rise to that height, said Stepan Arkadyevitch, not forthrightly acknowledging the loftiness of religion, but at the same time not daring to acknowledge his free thinking before the person who, by saying one word to Pomorsky, could provide him with the desired post. That is, you mean to say that sin prevents him? Said Lydia Ivanovna. But that is a false view. There is no sin for believers. Sin is already redeemed. Pardon, she added, looking at the footman, who came in again with another note. She read it and responded verbally. Say tomorrow the Grand Duchess's. There is no sin for a believer, she continued the conversation. Yes, but faith without works is dead, said Stepan Arkadyevitch, recalling this phrase to the catechism, defending his independence only with his smile. There it is, from the Epistle of the Apostle James, said Alexei Alexandrovitch, addressing Lydia Ivanovna somewhat reproachfully, evidently to do him with something they had talked about more than once. How much harm the wrong interpretation of that passage has done. Nothing so turns people from faith as this interpretation. I have no works, I cannot believe. When that is said nowhere, what is said is the opposite. To labor for God, to save your soul by works, by fasting, Countess Lydia Ivanovna said with squeamish contempt. These are the wild notions of our monks, whereas that is said nowhere. It is much simpler and easier, she added, looking at Oblonsky with the same encouraging smile with which, at court, she encouraged young maids of honor bewildered by their new situation. We are saved by Christ, who suffered for us. We are saved by faith, Alexei Alexandrovitch confirmed, approaching and approving of her words with his eyes. Vous comprenez l'anglais? Lydia Ivanovna asked, and receiving an affirmative answer, stood up and began looking through the books on the shelf. I want to read Safe and Happy, or Under the Wing, she said with a questioning look at Karenina. And having found the book and sat down again, she opened it. It's very short. It describes the way in which faith is acquired and the happiness beyond all earthly things, which then fills the soul. A believer cannot be unhappy because he's not alone. You'll see now. She was about to read when the footman came in again. Madame Borodin. Say tomorrow 2:00. Yes, she said, holding the place in the book with her finger, sighing and gazing with her beautiful pensive eyes. That is the effect of true faith. Do you know Marie Sanin? Do you know about her misfortune? She lost her only child. She was in despair. Well, and what then? She found this friend, and now she thanks God for the death of her child. That is the happiness that faith gives. Yes, that's very, said Stepan Arkadyevitch, pleased that she was going to read and give him time to recover a little. No, he thought, looks as if it would be better not to ask for anything this time, so long as I can get out of here without messing things up. It will be boring for you, said Countess Lydia Ivanovna, turning to Landau. You don't know English, but it's short. Oh, I shall understand, Landau said with the same smile and closed his eyes. Alexei Alexandrovitch and Lydia Ivanovna exchanged meaningful glances, and the reading began. If you enjoy this format, please leave a like and subscribe and return tomorrow for the next chapter.